All right, guys, what's going on? It's Jack, and welcome back to another video. And you know what? One of the things that I've heard and or read on all sorts of different forms of social media that we're going to be talking about today in today's topic is that XDefiant only caters to good players. And sometimes, no matter how ridiculous something might be that somebody says, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there's a little bit of truth to that. So we're going to get into that today. So because there's certainly some evidence to make this pretty much true, but at the same time, it's kind of, how do I put this? It's pretty much overblown in my humble opinion. So let's get into it. So who does XDefiant actually have to please when you think about it? Well, who can it possibly please, right? Well, you've got the people that are the casuals, which range anywhere from the person that only has a couple of hours a week to play to someone who plays often but just, doesn't really care. They just kind of go through the motions. They may even buy a few things in the store, and then that's pretty much it, right? Okay. And then you've got the people that are in the middle, and this ranges from anywhere that is basically the slightly above average player to the person that could be let's say a content creator or someone who's just really good at the game and spends a lot of time playing at the game, whether he or she does content creation or not. So you're talking about everybody that's like above average in terms of what they're able to do, and as well as their experience in the game or just in the genre as well, and to somebody who's higher up there that, whether they do content creation or not, they're just really good at the game, right? But they're not at pro level, and that's where level 3 comes in. The third stage to where XDefiant has to please is also the competitive side, right? So you've got anybody who is basically, when you get to the people that are like elite level in terms of skill in the competitive scene, you're talking anybody who is an amateur who wants to be a pro player to the person who literally is there and is literally the top 1% of the people that play the game. And we're talking top 1% in terms of time invested. We're talking about time 1% in skill, strategizing, competing, everything like that, you name it, right? And the reason why we're naming this an XDefiant is because it does have a ranked playlist, and it is something that is considered for pros to eventually play in year 2, granted the game gets there. All right, so these are basically the 3 categories that XDefiant actually has to please, right? Because just like every other multiplayer shooter out there, for the most part, most multiplayer shooters, you gotta, if you're a casual game, and especially if you've got ranked mode as well, you gotta literally please these 3 categories, which is one of the things that XDefiant has to basically get right? So now, on one hand, it makes sense to listen to your top 1% because there's nobody else in the world that is spending, like, there's hardly anybody in the world that's spending that ridiculous amount of time playing the game, strategizing the game, taking it that seriously, getting a team together, doing coming up with strategies, call outs for the maps and all that kind of stuff. Like, they know the game in and out from every angle that you can think of, right? Okay, so it makes sense that you want to listen to these people, right? Well, one thing you can't forget is that is one perspective. Granted, it's a very strong perspective, but it is one perspective. So obviously the way that XDefiant caters to this is by basically in terms of how they're going to handle ranked playlists, as well as things that they're going to choose to implement in competitive when that does come to fruition, and what they're not going to choose, right? This goes from everywhere to from game modes to the maps that are going to be played, to the abilities that may or not be allowed, to weapons that may or may not be allowed, even attachments that may or may not be allowed, right? All of this comes to play. But again, that is one perspective, because you've got actually a bigger piece of the pie, which is the casual side, right? And to this day, despite the fact that gaming has certainly come a long way from 20 years ago, right? When you look at how competitive gaming was 20 years ago in comparison to now, right now it's a lot more open, and it is getting bigger, and it is getting more of an influence. However, it's the majority of the population are still the casuals, right? If this wasn't the case, then XDefiant would not be the kind of game that it is trying to be in the first place. Now, when it comes to a casual game, right? when you look at a classic arcade first-person shooter like XDefiant, when you go all the way to the origins of the arcade first-person shooter, from like, let's say you go back to like, let's say COD 4, for instance, right? I mean, I don't think COD 4 is the origin. I think you have to go all the way back to COD 1 for that. But since I don't know that much about COD 1, we're just going to stick to COD 4, especially since Call of Duty turned everybody's head around COD 4. And then after Modern Warfare 2, everything just kind of blew up, right? Okay. So when you're looking at the origins of Call of Duty and the creation of the arcade first-person shooter that took the world by storm, one of there's a number of things as to why people played that game, right? Very simple. Back in the day, as far as console, all we had was Halo. Okay, but Halo, even though it was all we had, at its core, there was a lot of things that Halo wasn't doing. And Call of Duty basically took full advantage of that. You could have all sorts of crazy stuff in the game that were all powerful, which, again, even though things are a little bit more balanced now with XDefiant, this still remains to be true. There are a number of things that are powerful in the game. They could be, you know, the player has the freedom to choose however they want. And when you're looking at gun-to-gun gameplay, even though there is a skill gap, the skill gap in a gun-to-gun gameplay scenario isn't quite as wide as it is in Halo, because Halo requires more consistency. The gunfights are a lot longer, except for when you pick up power weapons or whatnot and stuff like that. But that's not how XDefiant exactly works. XDefiant works differently than that. So it's much easier to get a kill in a game like XDefiant or in Call of Duty compared to a game that may be a little bit more competitive like Halo or an Unreal Tournament or a Quake, right? Now, that right there, in and of itself, as well as the different kinds of goofy ways that you can customize your weapons and your classes right there, is something that caters to both beginners and above average players simultaneously. And what happens is, when you're a beginner, right, just like in everything else, no matter what, and no matter what else you do in life, no matter what else, doesn't matter what it is. It could be something like a hobby, like, let's say, for instance, you enjoy drawing, right? So I'm sure some of you guys that are listening to this video are probably artists in and of yourselves, right? You've probably been drawing for a long time. And I'm pretty sure that when you first started, if you've been doing it for a while, you probably weren't as good as you are now, and you probably weren't as knowledgeable as you are now. Same exact thing with XDefiant / Call of Duty or classic Call of Duty. And these things that are put in the game actually do allow you, they give you the chance, especially with XDefiant, with its matchmaking system currently. Even though it's not a perfect matchmaking system, it's a whole hell of a lot better than something that is rigged to make everybody's experience a one-to-one, regardless of how skilled they are or whatnot, which is a very, very rigged experience. And I have another word for that, but I don't want to use it. But I'm pretty sure you guys might know what that word is. It's a C, and it's a long word, and it starts with a C. I'll let you guys think. Now, with that being said, because of how the factions work, because of how the guns work, and how fast the time to kill is compared to, let's say, a more competitive game like Unreal Tournament or Halo and stuff like that, and the fact that it's actually that even though it is fast, and even though there are things in the game that separate what the skillful player from the non-skillful player, even if those little things, like, for instance, the bit of air strafing that the game allows you to do, and the bunny hopping, which has gotten nerfed about twice now, even with those little mechanics in there, the game still allows, granted the player wants to and is willing to put in the time, it allows every player of every skill level to actually improve and to get better. The problem is that we're in a generation currently, and again, I'm not trying to, disrespect anybody. I'm just telling you how it is. And if you get offended, then that's your problem, respectfully speaking. But we're in a generation now to where everybody, even in the real world, outside of gaming, they want results tomorrow, right? They want, even when it comes to things like losing weight, getting bigger, seeing the results in the gym and stuff like that, all of that takes time. And XDefiant and getting good at a first-person shooter of any kind, regardless of whatever the title is no different. But the game itself even though it doesn't seem like that to a lot of beginners at face value, even though it doesn't seem like that, below the surface, if you actually get to know the game more and understand what I'm trying to tell you, is you are given the opportunity, regardless of how challenging it is, to literally move up this invisible ladder of skill levels from player to player in in an organic matchmaking experience. Now, the reason why I mentioned that it wasn't perfect was because of the team balancing. Because if you're a solo player like myself, for instance, right, you are going to find yourself in instances to where you are going to be basically trying to carry teams of really bad players, because the game, through statistics, believes that you're one of the better players, if not the best player in the lobby. And what it's going to do is it's going to make it more challenging for you to get a win, so to speak, right, in order to achieve balancing. Now, obviously, this is the lesser of two evils when it comes to, when you're talking about EOMM, which is what we call skill-based matchmaking, but it's not real skill-based matchmaking. What we are complaining about when we say skill-based matchmaking is EOMM. We just happen to be calling it skill-based matchmaking because it is the more popular used term, but it's actually EOMM that we have a problem with. I don't think many skilled players would have a problem with a legit skill-based matchmaking system if it was like truly a skill-based matchmaking system. But the reason that even that would have a hard time prevailing is because you would have a lot, because when it comes to pubs, which is a much bigger percentage of players compared to ranked in so many games now, especially one like this, you're talking like, in order to find other people that are about your skill level, the game has to do a longer search. It has to do an expanded search to find other players. And what ends up happening is you're having a bad experience because the connection is crap because of it. And it's either going to favor the player who's on the closest server, though, as opposed to just trying to find like a group of players, regardless of skill level, in terms of where their location is. And then after that, it separates them so that way the lobby can be as even as possible. And for me personally, I don't mind it. It's a pain in the ass sometimes, there's no doubt about it, especially if you get a group of really good players that are stacking and you're just playing solo. That's when it's at its worst. However, if it manages to be a close match, there's a little bit somewhat of a satisfaction behind it. But ultimately, the way an arcade shooter is designed at heart is, believe it or not, even though it is an arcade shooter that is meant to be the most casual and non-competitive at its heart, there still is, just like everything else in life, there is that skill gap. And however wide you want to make that skill gap is in the hands of you. It's in the hands of the player. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that even though at face surface, right, XDefiant does seem to cater to just the what's it called, the sweats, so to speak, as some people like to use that term. A lot of people like to use that term, actually. If you look beneath the surface, there's actually more to it than that. And if you spend enough time playing a certain game that you like, just like spending enough time drawing that picture or drawing because you have a passion for drawing, you're going to learn things, whether it's on your own or whether it's with a little bit of help or both. You're going to learn things about your craft or about your game that a lot of other players that didn't dig in deep enough won't know. And then you'll come to realize that, yeah, actually beneath the surface, there's actually more to this than I thought. And of course, we live in a world today to where people judge by the cover immediately, right? Sure, sometimes you could be right, but usually there's more going on underneath the surface than meets the eye. So what I'm trying to tell you is, ultimately, if you want to get better at XDefiant, if you are a beginner and you want to get better at this game, there are going to be obstacles in the way, but that's literally no different than everything else. But if you really want it, you can do it. And it's actually not as hard as you may think. And one tip that I will give you, because I was once, one of the worst players that could ever play an arcade shooter. And I kid you not, I'm not even exaggerating when I say this. And this was back like in the mid 2000s, right? Which your average player back then sucked even more than now. Right now, your average player is better than what your average player was back in those days. And back in those days, I was like the worst of the worst. But as soon as I understood and learned that spawns are not random and there's a way that spawns actually work, all that extra time that I had spent previously playing the game all of a sudden started to work in my favor because I knew where engagements were to take place. And then that's when I started to strategize. That's when I started to experiment more, change things up a little bit more. And as literally, like as things started to change right before my eyes, that is when I started to expand, and not just expand in terms of how I played the game, but how my mental approach was towards having an open mind, to where it's like, okay, if I'm not doing so well, there's something I'm not quite understanding. So that's what I'm trying to tell you is ultimately you can choose to believe me or not. That's completely up to you. You have every right to believe me or not believe me. However, what I'm trying to tell you is there's a lot more that goes on beneath the surface. And to this day, every single game I play, whether it's a franchise I'm familiar with or not, in the beginning, I always struggle. I always struggle. And I always go through this transition period because those little things that make a difference from one game to the next is that new learning curve that I have to overcome. And it's obviously something that is always not easy. However, getting to the other side is very satisfying, and it pays dividends in terms of satisfaction, in terms of, you know, and just everything. And the transition to that is actually one of the most fun parts for me personally. But again, like I said, there's a reason why some of these players that are really good, legitimately good, not the ones that are cheating, there's a reason why they're as good as they are. And that's because they've dug in that deep and they've spent that much time and they've done what it is necessary for them to do from a investment perspective, in terms of, you know, time invested in learning and understanding a game in order to get there. Now, are there some people that got there bogusly by using quote unquote cheats or whatever else? Yeah, especially in this day and age. This is, again, like I said, people are looking for shortcuts. Most people who cheat are ones that want to take shortcuts, and they don't, you know, it is what it is. It happens in every aspect of life, no matter how you look at it, whether it's in, you know, trying to, you know, lose weight fast or whatever it is, you know, it's one of those things. But if you're going to do things naturally, right, which is the best way to do them, you can do things naturally, you're going to have to go through that type of, you know, initial struggle. But the good news is it's a video game, right? So you can still enjoy the fact that you're going through the struggle if you open up your mind and change up your mindset. And you can do it. If I did, so can you. And not only that, guys, I mean, if you want proof that I struggled with XDefiant, all you have to do is look at, like, let's say either past streams or past gameplays of when I first started to cover this over a year ago. You look at my gameplay then, it sucked compared to now, right? And the only thing that's changed is the amount of time invested, as well as the fact that the game overall has improved for me personally in terms of how it feels and how the hit registration feels and all that stuff. Is it where it needs to be? No. However, my time invested is paying off. So I still have a long ways to go, but at the same time, I've come a long way. And that's my thought process when it comes to this. And it's my thought process with everything else, pretty much. So anyway, with that being said, guys, I know this video was a little bit long, but I wanted to also have this, you know, kind of like, a from within type of moment where I wanted to say everything that I wanted to say. So with that being said, I want you guys to tell me what you think down in the comments section below. And as always, I like to thank everybody for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you guys on the next one.